Hello, everyone. It's Larry Kotlikoff back with another episode of Economics Matters, the podcast. I'm here with my two buddies, Kara and Mark Brandt. Kara and Mark, I met because they're long-time users of MaxiFi Planner, and they got in touch with me, and I started. They've been attending our office hours, but I quickly realized that they would be a great asset to the company. So I engaged them since they have such a broad, deep knowledge of our software in providing uh, demos to advisors, financial advisors. And they're now thinking about even setting up their own financial advisory uh, to help people use our software for their financial planning. We have a lot of advisors, not a lot, not a huge number, but advisors around the country doing this using our software, MaxiFi Planner, MaxiFi Planner.com, to provide financial guidance. And it's based on economics. I'm an economist. It's based on economic principles. So it's economics-based planning, completely different, could not be day and night different from conventional Wall Street planning. And it's meant to make you keep you safe, lower your risk, raise your living standards safely by finding Roth conversions or Social Security strategies, or other types of moves that can safely raise your living standard, uh, and also to help you with your investment allocation based on what economics has to say. Again, 100% different from conventional planning. But anyway, in the process of meeting Mark and Kara, I discovered that uh, they, like a number of our customers, are uh, pilots. And Mark and Kara are very special pilots because uh, they have a history of flying not just for commercial airlines, in this case, United Airline, but also for the Air Force. So Kara was a C-5 cargo uh, jet pilot in the Air Force, and Mark was a U-2 pilot. And for anybody who's watched the movie about the bridge, I think with Tom Hanks, they know about Gary Powers and the U-2 flight that he was on that was shot down by the Russians in the late 50s, and how he was imprisoned, and there was a prison swap. Terrific movie with Tom Hanks, the bridge, and the it's a bridge between East and West Berlin. That's where the swap occurred, and um, but then after uh, that happened, the U-2 kept flying, and there were pilots like Mark who were flying improved versions of the U-2, and none of the other ones were shot down to my knowledge. And I want to talk to them about their experience in the Air Force and what that was all about, and how they went from being say 8-pounder babies into to becoming Air Force pilots. And the C-5 cargo plane, if you haven't seen it, is massive. It's like seems like it's several houses flying together. Uh, and then talk to them about their transition into commercial aviation. Mark is still flying for United. Both Mark and Kara still do training of pilots. And then maybe we'll spend some time talking about their role with the company. They're currently, as I said, giving demos to financial advisors, but we hope to get them to do office hours for newbie users of MaxiFi Planner, and also to get them to make some training videos or courses in the form of courses, and maybe even give a full course to advisors on economics-based planning. So we have a lot of great ideas and goals for Mark and Kara for the company. But let me turn it over to you two. Starting with you, Kara. Where did you grow up, and where were you born, and how did you end up in a C-5 at the controls of a C-5 jet Air Force plane?
Wow, okay. Well, thanks. Well, it's great to be here. Um, grew up I was an Army brat, young. Ultimately ended up in North Carolina, went to the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, go Tar Heels. Got a degree in math and actually accepted a Air Force scholarship at the time. So I was ROTC. And that's how I originally ended up flying airplanes. I got a pilot slot in the Air Force and went to pilot training right out of the gate. My first airplane, actually with the Air Force, was a little airplane called the C-21. It's like a Learjet 35. We did VIP transport, basically just a glorified taxi driver. We'd take generals and congressmen to meetings. Then ended up flying the C-5, which, as you said, yes, absolutely huge. That was a lot of fun. Very interesting flying. After the military, I flew for United for a few years till 9/11. And then I was furloughed with a big second round of furloughs, and decided we sort of took a little turn after we realized how unstable, right, the airline industry at the time was with 9/11 and everything. And then that's when I started working for a military contractor with the Air Force. Basically, I was an instructor pilot for Air Force and Air National Guard pilots for the big Air Force drones that they have, the MQ-1s and the MQ-9s.
Well,
So anyway, basically that's my quick and dirty. Did I miss anything?
Mark, give us where were you born?
I was born sort of right between Malibu and Santa Barbara in Southern California, little town called Camarillo. Um, Pretty simple family. Nobody had gone to college or certainly not flown jets in the military. And we would go to a naval air show every year at Point Mugu. And I was one of those fortunate people that at about early teens said, I'm going to do that. And was really concerned about paying for college, didn't even know what that meant. And so I knew I had to get a scholarship. I was awarded a scholarship as an engineer at UCLA for the 4 years via the Air Force and earned a bachelor's in aerospace engineering with the intent of eventually being a test pilot, actually. And luckily, I got to the Air Force and found out that I liked it. Just luck. I think I'd flown 2 times in an airplane before I was there, but somehow decided when I was 12, that's what I was going to do. Luckily, I liked it, and secondarily, fortunately, I was good at it. So I'm a lucky guy in that regard. I didn't get to college still wondering. I pointed my skis downhill, and my dream that was just a foolish, uneducated dream, really, ended up aligning with my capabilities. And it's been fabulous. I taught her some in the Air Force. My initial assignment was as an instructor pilot. We have a lot of experience teaching, building training programs. I know that everybody's got a different mind, and I need to talk to the mind that is trying to absorb right now. And that may be a completely different story from a different mind. And that's one of our skills. Anyway, that evolved into the Air Force will handpick pilots for the Thunderbirds and for the U-2. And I was fortunately handpicked to fly the U-2. Probably the best job I'll ever have. I peaked early, all over the globe, trying to preserve peace, trying to find out what's going on before the problems start. But in the event that problems do start, we're also, of course, part of the link to try to bring them to an end. But it was very gratifying. And the military is an amazing place for younger people. At 28 years old, I'm flying 5 miles off of borders where if I was to deviate, it would be a big time UN, a national incident that a U-2 spy plane wandered over country X, uh, could result in my U-2 spy plane being engaged, and who knows where that might go. So you're
This
20,
is 21 years old?
28
28.
when I
28.
first got to the U-2.
Okay.
So you're a 28-year-old kid given the, keys to the hen house. You fly alone in that airplane. If people understand 100 series fighter jets, it's an F-104 essentially with big old long wings made by Lockheed to do one thing, go high and be survivable and be a really good intel platform. I had to fly in a spacesuit, kind of think Saturn V with the fishbowl on your head. That was my backup pressurization system. If I lose pressurization above 64,000 feet without a backup, my blood boils and I turn into a raisin. Luckily, that never happened.
You were flying at 72,000 feet, right? Something like that?
Over 70,000. Yeah.
You were 70. So at what point are you in outer space at that,
I wish I could say I'm anything that would be an astronaut, but I'm not. I think it's 70,000 feet is the ballpark, 15 miles, I think, and I don't know, space is well above that. The definition of now you are in space. I'm
yeah.
in the stratosphere anyway, but I can still feed oxygen to my jet engine, so I'm not in space.
So were you higher than Chuck Yeager?
No, he based on I don't know Chuck personally, General Yeager, but my information is from his book and the right stuff, and he certainly Zoom climbed an F4 in the right stuff to altitudes where the motor flamed out. I would have to guess that he's been well above me in an airplane and then falling ballistically trying to get that motor started again. So I kept it in
Doesn't
the
sound like fun to me.
envelope. I would have loved to done that sort of thing, but no, I never went to test pilot school because Kara and I got married and we decided to have kids, and that changed everything. So
I got it. So Kara, tell us about the C-5. Give us an idea how big it is and what it is like, how complicated it is to fly it compared to the kind of private type jets that you were flying before. How much time did you have to spend learning about it? And what is it exactly, how long are the flights? Tell us the whole story.
The C-5, massive. It's the largest aircraft that the Air Force flies. As a matter of fact, I think there's only one, at least when I flew, there was only one aircraft in the world that was bigger, and that was the Russian,
I don't know.
can't even remember what it was called, but they only even had a couple, and it was only slightly bigger. So, and obviously we have a huge fleet of C-5s. It's basically worldwide transport. Cargo compartment is big enough to fit 6 Greyhound buses. So
Oh,
it was huge, probably about a little bit less than half the size of a football field, like where the players play. So it's big. I remember one of the most challenging parts, it actually wasn't challenging to fly. It actually flies beautifully. What's challenging is taxiing it. It's literally like driving a building. So you have the way the gear work, it actually has to have special gear in order to get you around corners because it's just so big. And when you're sitting in the cockpit, you're about, 25 feet above the ground, just sitting in the cockpit because it's such a big aircraft. Let's see, what else? It's designed to do air refueling. So as far as how long the airplane can fly, the aircraft can actually fly, well, the longest sortie I ever flew was 25 hours. So I was 25 hours from the minute I got in, the minute I got out. We had to get gas in the air. So it's called an AR, an air refueling mission. We actually had to get gas in the air twice. And we
is
just went
is that
straight to
tricky? Is that tricky? You hold
it's extremely tricky. Yes, it's actually very tricky. It's flying formation underneath. So you'll come up on the tanker, which is the big aircraft that the Air Force aircraft that have the gas on board, and they're flying, and you come up under them to within about, I don't know, 7-10 feet, and they have a big boom that they feed, and it hooks into a little area at the top of the aircraft. It sort of snaps into so from the KC-135 or the KC-10, whatever the tanker is with the gas, it'll actually fit the little piece into your aircraft. And then you have to stay there. You've got to stay steady
For a long time.
for a long time. And in the C-5, when you get gas, you're getting a lot of gas. So the fighters do this, but they only get a little bit of gas because they're small. And we would be on the boom is what they call it. We'd be getting gas for almost an hour at a single time.
Wow.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
is it a matter of saying, if you went a little bit too fast or a little bit too slow, or the wind knocked you, would the boom come out? Would there be a danger
Yes.
connected to?
The boom would come out, it automatically disconnects in a lot of cases. So if it reaches a certain amount of pressure, right, shear pressure, either one direction, forward, back, it'll automatically disconnect. But there's actually a boom operator who's sitting in the tanker, and he will disconnect, or he or she will disconnect sooner, even just for safety, and so that it doesn't damage the boom potentially. But yeah, it's a handful. It's actually pretty it's probably one of the coolest, scariest things I've ever done, actually.
And you were doing this a fair amount. So it's scary, but also routine, I
Uh,
guess.
Semi-routine. It actually wasn't, it's not real common. Not like a fighter. Fighters will do stuff like that a lot. C-5s don't get gas a ton. Maybe we'd have missions at our squadron that would do air refueling once or
Mhm.
twice a month. And a mission would come up that would do air refueling. So not common enough to get really, really good, and not as intimidated by it, but enough. And certainly you'd do simulators, and you do training missions so that you keep up to speed on it. But yeah, it's intimidating.
Is it the kind of thing where the weather conditions are such that it's just impossible to do it? Uh, or you want to hold off to do it, or you want to go to a different altitude to do it?
All of the above. You certainly can have weather where you just can't do the mission. We would absolutely try. So maybe the weather's bad at, 28,000 feet or 24,000 feet or wherever we were going to do our air refueling. And then you would try to find other altitudes that are safer, maybe another air refueling route that you and the tanker can communicate and meet there. So yeah, you'd move around. I did have one where we actually ended up, it was legal, the weather was legal, but it was ugly, very unpleasant. I had 75 troops in the back, and the weather was just, we were bouncing all over the place. And I think probably half of them were airsick and puking, and it was just terrible. But we had to get where we had to get, and it was safe. It was just very unpleasant for those poor guys.
Let's talk about retirement for a minute. It's something Americans think about regularly. Ask yourself, how financially secure do you really feel? Do you have enough money to retire? How much is really enough? And if you don't have enough money, how can you possibly find that extra money before you do retire? These are all tough questions. My retirement software, MaxiFi Planner, is the powerful online planning tool that takes the guesswork out of retirement. It weighs your assets against your fixed expenses to calculate how much you can safely spend every year for the rest of your life based on when you decide to retire. And it shows you safe ways to find more money. MaxiFi makes a complicated problem like retirement planning simple. It's accurate, easy to use, and produces what you really seek, peace of mind. So make the smart choice and visit MaxiFi.com today. Don't miss this opportunity. That's MaxiFi with an I, MaxiFi. MaxiFi.com. Now let's get back to the podcast. And so you're able to get the boom to go in
Mhm.
and refuel.
Yep.
Well, so how many pilots are there? You're going for 25 hours, or and do you have a bunch of co-pilots with you, or?
Yeah, that's a great question. There's actually if you're going to do a mission that's over, I don't remember the hours now, I think it's 18, but we regularly did 24 plus hour missions. You have to have at least 3 pilots. So you'd have an aircraft commander, which is the military's version of a captain. They call them aircraft commanders. And then you'd have 2 co-pilots. Um, and actually, I've been on crews where there've been 4, 5, maybe even 6 pilots. There can be evaluators on board. And then on top of it, you have load masters that control the load, right? Because it can be extremely dangerous. You have to be experts at how to load the aircraft with the center of gravity, how things are strapped down in the cargo compartment. So you'd have anywhere between 3 and up to 9 load masters, depending upon the complexity of a mission. And then we also had flight engineers on the flight deck as well. So you have the pilots and the flight engineers on the flight deck, and the flight engineers monitored systems, took care of fuel, took care of temperature. They were sort of workhorses when it came to actually the systems of the aircraft. And we'd have minimum 2 flight engineers every sortie, and on a trip like that, you'd have to have at least 3. So probably the biggest crew I ever had was actually 22. There were 22 of us. Um,
running
so
this running this plane? Wow, geez.
yeah,
And
yeah.
So if you put in, let's say, you said it's big enough to handle how many Greyhound buses?
Six.
Six. How
Six
many
great.
tanks could it hold? Or is that,
Depends on the tank. Depends on the tank. So we could carry, so obviously, um, if the tank was as narrow as a Greyhound bus, which I think a lot of them are, um, you could probably put, my guess is, I don't know, what's an average tank?
I think you're going to run into a weight limitation before a volume
Well, that's probably
limitation.
true. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
probably true because tanks are very dense. Yeah, I'd have to get back to you on that. A lot, but we also could fly helicopters. So they had some of them like a Huey, you'd actually have to remove the propeller or
Top rotor.
the top rotor. Yeah.
yeah.
But
And yeah.
yeah,
Mm.
Uh, And did you have to land in dangerous places? I mean, were you ever worried about getting shot at this time at the time you were flying?
I wasn't any more than, I mean, honestly, at the time, probably the most dangerous place I ever landed was Haiti. There was a lot of unrest
Mhm.
when I was flying the C-5. And when you landed, there were armed American soldiers everywhere to protect the aircraft. But for the most part, C-5s are so big, and to do that type of sort of the more scary undercover opsy type, special ops type stuff, it's usually uh, the C-17s, maybe the like a C-130. They're smaller, they're much more um, maneuverable and like smaller runways, that kind of stuff. They can turn around. It's very difficult to turn a C-5 around if you don't have lots of room, that
Oh,
kind of stuff.
you mean on the ground, or I see, right.
On
And
the
what,
ground, yeah.
and just fundamentally, what is it? How different is it to, let's say, fly? I understand, all these 21 other people helping to do different things, but just to fly, and uh, are the controls the same for a C-30, C-5 versus a smaller plane?
They are. They are.
It's
Yeah.
basically the same.
Yeah, it actually flies beautifully. I mean, four engines, so it was a four-engine aircraft, and a lot of the smaller ones, may have two engines. But it actually flew extremely well. One thing you'll notice if you ever see a C-5 flying coming into land, whenever you look at it, it looks like it's going really slowly. And it's just because in the air, it's so big that your eyes aren't adjusting, right? Your eyes think that it's a lot closer to you than it really is. And so it looks like it's moving really slowly. But actually, we fly at the same air speeds that most aircraft fly.
And were you a kind of unique in the Air Force as a female pilot for a C-5, or were there other females flying C-5s?
There were a few others. I was definitely unique. There weren't a lot of women, especially when I went through. So I graduated from pilot training back in 1992. Um, and I realized pilot training is about a year long. And I realized when I was at pilot training, there were what, maybe 220 student pilots, would you say, a year at Laughlin? So I went to Laughlin Air Force Base in Texas for my pilot training. And there were a couple of female instructor pilots, and there were certainly a couple of other female students, student pilots. But it was at the end of the year that I realized I'd literally never seen another woman in the bathroom. I'd been there a year and had never crossed paths with a woman in the bathroom.
Is that different now? Do we have many more female pilots?
We do. We do quite a bit. I'd say we have my rough and consider the source, right, estimate would probably be we have 10 to 20 times the women now that we did back then. Yeah,
Okay.
so we maybe had one out of 100, one out of 75 back then. And now I'd say it's much closer to one out of 10.
I
Would
would.
you agree with that? Yeah.
So our Secretary of Defense, Hexeth, is it,
Yeah.
been suggesting that women should not be in active duty or in the military, I guess, period. Uh, uh, I'm wondering whether for these kinds of uh, kind of uh, assignments where you have to have kind of a calm judgment, whether women might actually be better. Just as an analogy here, when we had the Great Recession in Iceland, they had several banks, Icelandic banks, were run by hotshot men who had made had borrowed money that in total that far exceeded the GDP of Iceland, and they'd taken in deposits and then it made risky loans to that went south, and so you had these major banks in Iceland that had demand deposits that were massive, many times the GDP of Iceland, if I recall correctly, and so Iceland was in a position to say, well, if we want to repay all these on-demand deposits, bail out all the depositors, as if we have deposit insurance, we have to, sacrifice several years of GDP. And Iceland decided they couldn't afford that, and they just reneged on those depositors. But they also immediately canned the men running the. I don't know if they passed a law, but they kicked out all the men running these banks, and they installed women to run the banks. I thought that was maybe I'm misrecalling exactly what happened, but they felt that the men were just, too dangerous in running banks. They were too big risk takers, and they weren't, being properly cautious. Any comments on that?
Well, I know nothing about the Iceland situation. I would say, as far as women and men both being pilots, I think being a pilot definitely has there's certainly certain characteristics that you really need to be good at being a pilot. 100%, absolutely, both men and women have them. I know plenty of women that are phenomenal pilots and plenty of men that maybe aren't, and vice versa. I really think it's just very person dependent, and so just because someone is or isn't a woman, it really doesn't mean anything to me. It's about what type of personality traits they are, what they have, the kind of the way they think. And those are the things that when you meet someone, especially when you're teaching, you meet someone and you begin talking to a young student, pilot, you can tell pretty quickly based off of their kind of the way they think, and the characteristics they have, whether or not this is maybe going to be suited for them. But I honestly haven't seen any type of consistent sex, right? Determination. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so she rejects your bigoted assertion. I think our women who replaced the men were just better people to do the job.
Yeah, yeah.
I'd love giving you a hard time.
It's interesting. I'll mention here, actually,
Who's the best pilot you ever saw?
The best pilot, actually, hands down, I know you're going to think I'm biased, but the best pilot I've ever known is Mark. I keep telling him, why couldn't he have been a surgeon or something like that? Because in the pilot world, there's not really a place for a lot of distinction between being the absolute best ever. Maybe you could go work for, Jeff Bezos or something, but then that sucks. Like, who wants to live that life where you're constantly on call? But if he was like the best surgeon ever, it'd be great. We'd have retired years ago.
Before I turn back to Mark here, what made Mark the best? What makes him the best pilot in your view? What was it that impressed you in flight training school about him as a pilot? And I mean, obviously, not everybody gets chosen to fly the U-2. I mean, that's an amazing accomplishment. I would say that's like the Nobel Prize of piloting, perhaps, right?
No.
He has
That overstates it.
Well, maybe it was, but it's very important though. It is good stuff. He's he's incredibly good at understanding airplanes. He understands how airplanes work. He understands where he is in space, as far as his airplane, his energy management. You know, when you, it's hard to explain actually. He's good at both feeling an airplane when he flies it, as well as understanding it and being intellectually good at what he's seeing when it comes to instruments or what he's seeing that happens outside there. Plus, he's a really great instructor too. Oh, this is fun. I didn't know I was going to get to say all kinds of great things about you.
Yeah. You have anything nice to say about Kara?
I was going to say, he wants you to move on.
So Mark, tell us about this. This is an interesting angle. You know, having a feel for the plane, having a feel for the systems. Tell us a little bit about that, because that's not something that, you know, the typical layperson like me would ever have, you know, thought about. You know,
I understand your question. I think it's an extremely difficult question to answer for somebody who doesn't have a background and can relate. You know, we process information a bit differently than the rest of the world. All of our information, we are taking in incredible amounts of information, being bombarded continuously. You've walked into a cockpit and probably looked around and said, oh my goodness, there's a lot of
A lot of
information
buttons.
being thrown at this person. We've got information coming in from looking out the window, evaluating positions of things on the ground, weather conditions, evaluating other aircraft in the airspace, evaluating problems with our airplane itself, all with time limits, because we can't pull over and park the airplane and open the hood and, you know, see what's going on. Our decision making is limited by how much fuel we have or the distance that fuel can turn into. So we are continuously filtering and crunching to bring nothing but the most timely information to the top, while keeping a racked and stacked prioritization of all other bits of information below it. And doing that continuously throughout a flight is, I think, a somewhat innate skill, but that can definitely be developed over time.
Yeah.
Want more money, less risk, and a better life? Buy Money Magic, a new book by Lawrence Kotlikoff, Boston University economist, personal finance expert, and best-selling author. Whether it's education, career, marriage, housing, investing, retirement, Social Security, IRA, or 401k decisions, Money Magic delivers scores of secrets to raise your living standard. Financial journalist Jane Bryant Quinn says Money Magic is a must-read. Nobel laureate George Akerlof says Money Magic is quite probably the best financial advice book ever written. Financial guru John Malden says, you'll love this amazing book. It's full of wit, wisdom, and startling paths to a better financial life. And columnist Scott Burns calls Money Magic a funny, brilliant read, offering wildly powerful, unconventional choices that can literally change your life. Get Lawrence Kotlikoff's Money Magic today at Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and independent booksellers.
There's also aspects of looking out and seeing model change and quickly predicting where this picture will be in the future and what to do with your airplane to make that picture be what you want it to be. I can glance out a cockpit window when flying with a new pilot and know instantly that they have a very limited understanding of where they are in space right now.
what do you mean by that exactly? How high up you are, or what?
You know, at all times with an airplane, you've got a goal in terms of where you want that airplane to be in the next split second, the next minute, the next 5 minutes, or 10 minutes. And it might be relative, and it's usually relative to something, relative to just the road you're driving down to, or relative to the airport upon which you intend to land, or relative to the other airplane that you're attempting to rejoin upon for a formation. So I think that's the best way I can answer your question, is that you are continually envisioning your desired future and then doing whatever is appropriate at that split second to make that exact future happen, and continually bracketing those decisions. I'm a little too much this, a little too little that, but a great pilot will always be right within a fairly narrow margin of bracketing where that airplane is for that final conclusion. That might be this million-pound 747 arriving within 500 feet of a runway, gently at the exact correct speed. And to do that really beautifully and elegantly and most efficiently is a massive information processing. You're taking raw data from your instrumentation, you're taking more subjective data from rates and things you see out the window, and gathering all of your experience to say, this is exactly what engine power setting I want. This is exactly what I want this gauge to read right now.
This is my airspeed. This is what altitude I want.
And of course, the best pilots will be right there. And then as you get less best, they will be farther and farther away, and their deviations from the optimum will be more, but ultimately probably wind up at about a reasonable answer.
So what about pilots? Are they, do you use them, or what do you think that their autopilots are, you know, let's say the equivalent of humans in terms of, do you trust I mean, how do you know, we understand as the public that, that a plane might be driven to some extent by an autopilot, with a pilot keeping control of the autopilot. And now with AI coming along, I guess there's a prospect for even more automation of these planes. So tell us both of your thinking about autopilots and AI and so forth in respect to aviation.
Understand. Increases in automation and warning systems, increased capability in those areas has been very important, I think, in changing and improving the safety rates over time. You know, we are filling the skies with more and more and more airplanes every day. And the infrastructure is not, meaning runways, airports, is not really keeping up with that. Not only that, we're getting a lot more population concentrated in many areas. So we're trying to get a lot of people into 10 pounds of people into a 5-pound bag. So automation and warning systems have really increased our ability to do that. However, like anything that you build, it can break. So a pilot or somebody who can function without these systems very efficiently and safely has got to be in the mix. Now, how do I use an autopilot? An autopilot is an algorithm. I have to give it input. I've got to tell it, this is what I want you to do. And if I can't do that myself as a pilot, I surely can't tell the autopilot what to do. Bad stuff in, bad stuff out. So the autopilot, first of all, has to have quality input. It has to be told exactly what to do because I've decided exactly what I want it to do. However, with exception of the takeoff, you can engage the autopilot at about 100 feet, and assuming nothing changes in that 5-hour transcon flight, leave it on its pre-planned course that you programmed 5 hours ago to land on its pre-programmed runway, such that I don't need to take control of the airplane again until rollout. But we all know in the real world, in 5 hours, weather systems move around, the portions of the airplane might malfunction. And so
air traffic
flying
control
is an extremely dynamic question. Getting an airplane 5 hours or 10 or 15 hours across the world. Lots of things can change, both with the airplane itself and the environment that the airplane is going to be facing. And For AI, I'm in no way an AI expert, but to teach AI algorithm, I would assume at some point will be reasonable, but I can't imagine based on output I see from certain AI sources that I would want to trust anything like my pink body to it.
Yeah, it's complicated. It's complicated.
Let me ask you this last question about the your Air Force experiences. What was your scariest moments flying?
You want to go first? You want me to go first? Okay. Okay. My scariest moment actually in an airplane was that first airplane I flew, I kind of mentioned the C-21, a little Learjet 35. We had taken I was a co-pilot at the time. I was literally, 7 months out of pilot training, just a baby. So what, 23 years old, maybe 24 years old at the time. We had dropped a general off and his aides at a meeting in Texas. And it was just my aircraft commander and I. It was just a 2-crew airplane. And we are flying back home. And I learned an extremely valuable pilot lesson, which is that thunderstorms, up until then, I'd always kind of thought of a thunderstorm as like a tree. So you have weather radar, you paint a thunderstorm, there's a thunderstorm, you need to fly around it, right? And you don't go in it, of course, but after this, I learned the valuable lesson that thunderstorms are this moving, breathing, living creature, and they grow and they reach out and they grab you. And so we were flying in Texas kind of during thunderstorm season, finally eating our lunch. We're up at altitude, probably about 37,000 feet, having lunch, enjoying, relaxing, the autopilot's on. And center, which is air traffic control, calls us and says, "Hey, I'm painting a level 5 thunderstorm in your 12 o'clock. Do you guys want to climb or something?" And the two of us are looking out the window like we didn't see anything. And we had the weather radar, and the weather radar wasn't painting anything. But of course, we were happy. Absolutely. Any help you've got, center, we'll take it. He says, "All right, I want you to turn 90 degrees. I want you to climb 4,000 feet." So we begin to initiate all this. And then bam, it was just this huge thunderstorm had grown into us. So it had been under us and then grew into us. And the violence was unbelievable. It was so aggressive. We literally couldn't see in the cockpit. Like you couldn't see the instruments, they were moving so aggressively. By the time we got out of it, and it probably honestly wasn't more than a couple minutes. It felt like an eternity. But by the time we came out of it, we'd lost over 20,000 feet. I mean, you are just along for the ride. It's like the biggest nightmare roller coaster ride you'll ever go on in your entire life.
Wow.
And after we were done, we had to obviously make sure that the aircraft was okay. But anyway, absolutely terrifying.
And
Scariest
and
moment
the
ever.
next day you got up and did it again.
Yes, roughly.
But she did it better the next time.
I did it better the next day. They have much better weather radars now than they did back then. This is back in 1994. But even then, it's more like an art. You have to kind of know where to look with the weather radar. And yes, he's absolutely right. I did it better the next day.
And Mark, what about you?
Carol only had about 1,000 hours at that time, and her aircraft commander was also pretty young. If you took off right now,
Yeah.
Larry, and landed about 3 years from now, you'd have about as much experience airborne as I've got.
That's true.
So when I hear her story, I just shake my head. I have never seen anything like that, and I never will,
Thank God.
because there's a lot of things you can do to kind of see that coming.
Yeah.
But we all have to learn. My scariest moment, I've had engine failures. I've had engine failures 10 feet off the ground, multiples. Lots of strange things happen. Weather can be super challenging, especially in a single seat airplane like mine, where you're not really, you can't engage an autopilot below about 45,000 feet without damaging it. But most of those things are pretty routine, honestly. Every engine failure I've ever had, I simply execute my well-trained procedures, and I put the airplane on the ground or do what's appropriate, and it's done. And it's more of an inconvenience than anything else. But scariest thing, We would do some UN work in the U-2, where we would get out a piece of chalk and on the flat black paint job of the tail, we would draw UN, and I would put a UN credential in my pocket. And now suddenly I've got the full protection of the United Nations. And there was a certain place where we do weapons verification missions for the UN as a UN agent. And in the same area, we would often also be running technically war combat missions. And I woke up one day to do a very, very invasive UN mission where the military airplanes weren't even allowed to go because it was too diplomatically complex. But because I had a UN authorization, they sent the U-2 to do this weapons verification. Happened to be on Columbus Day, and I didn't realize we celebrated Columbus Day, but very aggressively. But the entire contingent of military forces for that day showed up for barbecues to celebrate Columbus Day, except for me. So normally when I was flying in this area of responsibility, it would be heavily supported with everything required to theoretically protect the U-2. I would have incredible amounts of information with which to build my situational awareness. And on this day, I find out I'm the only guy flying. And so I go deep, deep, deep into the center of this country over its capital. And just as I'm entering the HF, which is a high frequency long range radio, which was the only communications device that I had, stopped working. So now it's just me in a very quiet cockpit above 70,000 feet, spending 3 hours doing very detailed overflights to gather information on the subject at hand. And I've got 24 missiles that are taller than a telephone pole pointed at me, arrayed around in 360 degrees. I've got a MiG-25 base about 60 miles off the wing there, and a couple other bad fighter bases off the other wing. And knowing that I'm a high threat and
high threat from our own country?
High threat from the country over which I'm flying in support of this UN initiative.
The dangerous country.
And there's it's just me. It's just my pink little 30-year-old belly at this point, I think. And it was very sobering because I thought, this is really important, and I'm glad that somebody is doing it, and I'm happy to be that somebody. But over the next 3 hours, if somebody gets a wild hair and decides they want to see a space-suited guy floating down in a parachute over this nation's capital, it's going to happen, which makes me think, well, I'm sure our contingent planners in Washington know exactly what they're going to do when that happens because we plan ahead. And then I wonder if my mom feels very good about that. But you're simultaneously contingency planning. The U-2 has one engine. If I lose an engine right now, what am I going to do with the airplane? What am I going to point at like now? If I get indication of missile engagement, what am I going to do? Where am I going to point it? And you just do your job. Well, we're really well trained, and we really value the service that we are giving to everybody back here in the United States, and we value the service everybody else is giving us. We need to pay somebody for our groceries. I will do my U-2 thing, and thank you for manning the cash register. But that was pretty scary.
I'd like to talk to you about a really powerful financial planning tool to help you make smart retirement and other critical financial decisions. It's a tool that factors in all your financial data and shows you what you can sustainably spend every year for the rest of your life. That tool is my software company's MaxiFi Planner. It's incredibly powerful, it's accurate, and it's easy to use. MaxiFi takes the guesswork out of financial decisions at every stage of life. Its focus is on raising, de-risking, and sustaining your living standard. MaxiFi lets you run what-if scenarios to see how your finances will change in taking new jobs, buying a home, doing Roth conversions, retiring early, downsizing, investing more in the market, you name it. Knowing the impact of these decisions before you make them is the secret to making smarter decisions. And it's also the secret to what we all seek, which is financial peace of mind. So please visit MaxiFi.com today to start planning. That's MaxiFi with an I, MaxiFi.com, MaxiFi.com. Now let's get back to the podcast. I think we have a
hours of.
I gotta say, we have a big balance of payments, balance of trade deficit with U-2. And we thank you for, I thank you on behalf of everybody listening for your service to the country. This is to me, it's extremely brave to be a pilot, period, and be a pilot for the Air Force.
Thanks, sir.
Goes beyond saying, but tell us then, you moved into working with United, and was this as much? This wasn't as much fun, I take it, but
Safer.
safer, and somewhat more regular hours, I imagine. But how do you view the? And then, Carrie, you were working in training. Were you actually going up in planes, or were you training people on the ground?
So I was doing flying training, but it's the drones. So I don't know if you've seen them, they're like, the MQ-9 is actually about 10,000 pounds. So
Yeah.
they're substantial aircraft. And so we were actively flying them, but flying them from a ground training station. So you actually the cockpit's basically it's in a room, and you have a link with the aircraft. You actually fly
Okay.
it like you would a drone.
So that brings me to my one quick drone question, which is, I understand the Ukrainians are trying to build, they say officially about 2 million drones this year, but unofficially I've heard 4 million. These are small drones to
Different.
deliver munitions. Do you think any idea? I mean, do we have both big and small drones in our? I mean, people are alleging that the U.S. is behind even Ukraine in terms of preparedness when it comes to fighting the next type of war. Any comments on that?
I have absolutely no idea. Yeah, we never actually talked or saw anything other than the large drones, the MQ-1, the MQ-9. Yeah, so I would guess there's probably some pretty creative stuff happening, but I'm not privy to any of it.
How far of a range do the big drones have?
They typically can be airborne, 10, 12 hours? Ish. It just depends on the altitude they fly and if they've got like backup tanks, like there are some added tanks, but they can be airborne for quite a while, probably even.
Do they fly across the country or fly across a country? I mean, well,
yeah.
do they fly?
Yeah, they don't typically fly that fast, and they're not really high. They maybe go 20 in the low 20s as far as their max normal operating altitude. Yeah, they typically are in 22, 24,000 is my guess. That operationally is where they'd use them. But yeah, they can travel pretty far. Usually they don't go, usually they're kind of based within a couple hours of where they need to go. So, you might have some based out of Italy right? Like, so they're going to be in a friendly country, and then they're going to go someplace that's maybe not so friendly to obviously do surveillance and reconnaissance. And then actually they do support weapon. They carry bombs, missiles. They can do some pretty impressive support of our troops on the ground as well. It's called CAS, close air support. And it's awesome.
Do we have any sense do either of you have a sense that, 10 years from now, we won't have Air Force pilots in the planes? We'll just have them on the ground controlling planes remotely. Is that kind of the future of the Air Force?
I suspect it will develop, and they'll get more and more capability to do that. But I have to say, and I don't know, maybe it's just my inability to grasp it, or my own biases because of my past, but I find it very hard to believe that they could ever actually eliminate human pilots in cockpits What do you think?
Yeah, if you reference our discussion about autopilots and that things change and you need somebody there continually evaluating the situation. The change could be a onboard mechanical function, it could be a weather situation, it could just be a complete change that happens between the launch of that thing and when it's on station ready to be employed. And the fact is if you want to have a dynamically retaskable uh, vehicle, a vehicle that you have communications with, communications links are by definition susceptible to corruption. We've had drones that have been captured by grabbing the communications link and essentially flying it from an unauthorized location to an unauthorized location.
Yeah, the enemy grabs
You know,
the aircraft.
once signals intelligence, signal security will always be a problem. The second somebody comes up with some encryption, somebody's working on beating it. So,
or you take out a satellite.
Then the other option is a pre-programmed mission, in which case, once you launch the thing, it's going to go do what you asked it to do, and the scenario may change substantially by the time it gets there. So, until we can until we can solidly ironclad communications links and facilities, the satellite that's sending the link, the radio that's sending the link, until we can fully masterfully encrypt that thing, you have got to have a dynamically retaskable entity in the loop, in my opinion. And
So yeah, makes sense. So I guess we've had obviously an huge expansion of the commercial commercial airline business. On the other hand, it seems like airlines are always going out of business. I think remember Pan Am and Eastern Airline and the different companies through the years. Why is it so hard for airline companies to seemingly to make a profit? Any insight on that? Do you have a feeling for why United is the best airline around? I guess we want to say that since you're an United Airlines pilot, but what is it about an airline company that makes it survive through time, that makes it competitive through the long haul, and others not? Is it just the human, organization? Is it the what's your sense of why some companies have failed and other companies have, American, United, Delta, they've been around a long time. JetBlue at this point has been around a long time, but others have failed along the way. What's your feeling about that? Just the economics of this business.
The shortest answer is don't believe a word I have to say, because I'm a simple pilot. I'm a simple caveman. However, I will offer some observations, but again, I'm not running this business.
Yeah.
I think an airline seat is to a degree a commodity, although you can distinguish that commodity by a multitude of things like levels of service or price point. Or if it's giving you what you want, can I get you from LA to Boston without making you stop in Kansas City? That might make that more valuable to you. So a lot of times we end up competing, I think, exclusively on the airline seat as a commodity. And especially with the evolution of the internet, we have the find lowest fare button. Now, I never use that button because I understand that seat is not one I want to sit in for 15 minutes. A lot of the low-cost carriers put 30 more seats, or call it 17%-ish more seats in one of the airplanes I fly than United does. And the sardine compaction of those seats for somebody at 6'2" is absolutely intolerable to me. So I understand that, and so do many of our customers, that we do distinguish our commodity at United relative to others. And I believe Delta and Southwest and most do. But there are a couple of carriers that absolutely are just going to jam you in as tight as They
Are they
pass.
gonna kind of cut corners on pilot training as well? Do you see that happening?
There's the theory and then there's reality. I'll tell you that theoretically, all pilots, like all doctors who hold a pilot certificate legally allows them to act in a certain capacity, are at least minimally safe per very rigid FAA standards. Those standards include the training and the recurrent training and the testing or check rides and evaluations. So we do have a minimum standard throughout the industry that is supported by both the Airline Pilots Association, that is probably an even bigger safety advocate, or probably the biggest safety
Yeah.
advocate, honestly, followed, I would say, by the carriers themselves, because nobody wants one way an airline's not going to survive is if they get a reputation for not being safe,
Mhm.
and then the FAA backs it up. So no, I don't. You know, of course, there's a profit motive, and of course, there's an incentive to teach those pilots using fewer resources. But I think at United, I know that we have training above and beyond what the FAA requires.
I see. What about we've had these problems with the Boeing, the Max, what is it, 787, is it? Uh, do you think the Boeing in particular, do pilots talk with each other about what's going on with Boeing and whether they've been cutting corners in production? I mean, uh, maybe things have turned around since these accidents have occurred, but I'm just wondering, what pilots think about Boeing these days. As a, you know, are you less happy flying a Boeing than you are flying another type of plane or a certain type of Boeing versus maybe an older version?
I'm going to have to throw out my pilot disclaimer again. I'm just a pilot. I'm not an airplane manufacturer. But I will tell you that I've never put my body in any airplane that I didn't feel was 100% safe to operate. And yes, it appeared that Boeing got off track for a while. I think you can read a lot about that, especially at the management level of Boeing, that they got off track. But I think that they make outstanding airplanes, and so does Airbus. I prefer Airbus um, for a lot of reasons, uh, but they're all outstanding. I've flown the 727, 37, 47, 57, 67 triple, not the 78.
He's
And I
flown a lot of Boeings.
fly the 320 series for Airbus, 319, 20, 21.
What do you like better about the Airbus over the Boeing?
Legroom?
Honestly, Larry, the cockpit is wonderful. And it matters because I live in this thing for hours a day, locked in my little cubicle while everybody else is back there sipping champagne. And so my little cockpit and how it's laid out is really critical to my joie de vivre. And the Airbus cockpit is much nicer. Airbus also uses a stick to control the airplane as opposed to a yoke. Back when United,
Difference
a
between
yoke is what you might think of for flying an airplane, when you watch the bomber
Right.
pilots.
Yeah. Or
That's-
you see the movie Airplane? It's got a yoke.
Yeah.
So what's
Yeah,
this?
we have a side stick where we accomplish the same thing with essentially call it a joystick.
Okay.
And fighter airplanes have sticks.
Yeah.
Yokes were generally because when you had cables and pulleys back in the old days fighting against big elevators and you were using your muscle to do things, it was nice to have this perhaps. But in a lighterly controlled airplane, you're going to find sticks for more, and I like to control an airplane better that way. And with electronic flight control systems, you don't need that big old yoke. But when we took the 777 at United in the 90s, we were asked that question, yoke or stick? In my opinion, we answered that question incorrectly. And all the old heads said, I got to do it like I've always done it. And I think that's the reason why Boeing still has yokes in the 787 and the 777.
Yeah. Okay, last question about the uh, airlines and flying. And then I want to talk to you briefly about your your experience with MaxiFi's and how you got into it and what do you think of it, and obviously you like it. So this is part of a, I don't want to call this an ad, but I think people would be interested in your perspective because we have a lot of MaxiFi users uh, watching our podcast. But the uh, we had this bird strike hitting that flight that came out of LaGuardia, and the pilot, I forget his name. Maybe they made a movie about it. I think it was also Tom Hanks.
Sully.
Sully, so it's called Sully, right? Yeah, he lands in the. It was the Tupolev wasn't that the big cargo?
That's it. The
About-
big Russian Soviet cargo. Mhm.
Yeah. Okay, so Sully lands in the Hudson. Are bird strikes, I guess, are quite rare. Has anything? Well, first of all, what do you think about Sully's performance that day? It seems unbelievable, but and I was just wondering whether this issue of there's been any change uh, in equipment that would limit the ability of that to happen again, or the possibility of that happening again.
A big enough object is always going to be a threat to a jet engine.
Mhm.
So when you're talking about geese and big old birds, they can take out a motor. They can take out, in Sully's case, two motors. We all think he did an outstanding job, period, dot. It was, in my opinion, the decision to make. There were some talks about Teterboro from the FAA, and I think that would have been a horrible idea. Um, so I've had engines taken out by bird strikes in the Air Force, where my engines were much more fragile. The high bypass turbofans that we use in commercial aviation, when you look down the engine, you see these really big fat blades. Those are really resilient and they can take a lot. But if it's a big enough bird at the right time, at the right place on the engine, it can take out the engine. Extremely rare. A single engine loss on a multi-engine airplane is a non-event. It's essentially just going to make you change your day. And a multi-engine failure, as we see, is extremely rare.
So
Yeah.
bird strikes themselves are not that unusual. They might hit the body of the aircraft, right, the wing, but actually, no kidding, having it, take out an engine, that's pretty unusual.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And two is crazy unusual.
Yes.
And Sully still did a great job dealing with it.
Yeah.
Did you guys ever meet Sully?
No.
No.
No, but I'd love to. Seems like a great guy.
Maybe he's watching this. Well, yeah, he does. Certainly saved a lot of lives that time. So let's talk about MaxiFi and how you got into how you heard about it and your use of it for yourselves personally, and then what do you think of it for the public?
Yeah. Oh, you're the one that found it. Why don't you?
Okay.
Yeah.
So we're pilots. We demand the maximum amount of certainty possible. As I've said, we're all about looking into the future. We need a plan. We want that plan to be deterministic. We can add variables later. We're approaching retirement. I'm 61. And at least 15 years ago, I started aggressively planning for retirement. I interviewed a multitude of professionals and was very unsatisfied with some of the answers I received. Like, do you have a suggestion for an investment vehicle that essentially, on average, over time is going to give you a margin to inflation? This is one of my questions. Some combination of investments that's going to more or less guarantee me a percentage return at and above over inflation? And every single person I asked that question just didn't have a clue what I was talking about. Turns out we absolutely have had one since the late 90s in the form of TIPS. Gives us a margin over inflation. So I was just really unsatisfied. Their answers were very stochastic. They started out with the question, how much money do you make? Or how much money do you want to spend? Where MaxiFi doesn't ask me that question. I need to decide, I need to run MaxiFi to find out what my capabilities are. And then after that, I can decide what I will do with those capabilities. So about 7 years ago, I stumbled onto MaxiFi website, and back then the program was not quite as robust. I spent months watching every single webinar. I started attending office hours before I bought the program. I'm a know what I'm doing before I do it type of guy. And then with great confidence, purchased the software, and we've held a subscription ever since. And it is the first time that I can answer the question, how much money can I spend today, this year, and every year for the rest of my life?
And not go broke.
And
Right.
if that isn't the critical question, then I don't know what is.
Mm-hmm.
And if I make a change 3 years from now, I do a $200,000 home improvement program. What does that do to how does that change my spending now, this year, and every year for the rest of my life? And I can evaluate those decisions in 30 seconds with MaxiFi. And so after about 5 years, we started having people come to us and say, Mark, what are you doing? Mark, what are you doing? And since then, we've helped many people put their MaxiFi plans together, and we'll spend several hours with them over Zoom meetings. And it's amazing, you don't know what you don't know, but Karen and I have spent so much time reading and listening and gathering resources that even the smartest people I work with, it takes a couple hours to really help them understand the animal and
Yeah, all the nuances of their
then
situation.
get them to where they can use MaxiFi to answer the questions that they're trying to ask.
Yeah, we have people that are, really dig in and use all the resources, and then we have other people that need some co-piloting or some. So we have these different. So we just introduced this what I call a concierge, full concierge service, where we can actually just put in your inputs or help you put in your inputs into the program, and then evaluate the results. And I've been doing that a lot. Just did 3 people today, work with 3 people today. And the amount of anxiety that people have about their finances is way sky high now because the markets are moving around so much. And we've got a recession looming. Some really distinguished economists think that's 90% chance. And then that means earnings uncertainty, or if if you have a small company, whether you can stay in business. So the whole idea here is to lower the anxiety, to find safe ways to maintain your living standard, even in light of things that could, you could lose your job. But well, what about some alternative? Well, then you have to cut your spending, but maybe there's these other ways of looking for alternative employment. Maybe a partner could work longer. Maybe you can downsize your home. Maybe you can think about lowering taxes with Roth conversion. Maybe there's things that might be that can mitigate the problems. But I want to say, we're not trying to sell the latest knife set that if you these guys, you go to a different kind of different events, you're going to see somebody selling the perfect knife that or go on TV and they'll be selling the knives. We're selling what economists have put together for 100 years, because our software is embedding 100 years of economic science in the field of finance. So we've just taken kind of the equations of the founders of modern finance, and that goes back to Professor Irving Fisher from Yale University, who started developing the life cycle theory of saving and consumption smoothing, of maintaining your living standard, just like a squirrel. I mean, this is not anything a squirrel wouldn't know, right? They gather acorns for the winter. And then there was, in the 50s, we had, well, actually in the late 40s, we had Johnny von Neumann, and a guy named, an economist named Oscar Morgenstern, who developed the economics of uncertainty. Because up to then, economists knew that there was uncertainty. So for 200 years, the profession is in place, but nobody had figured out what should people do systematically to deal with uncertainty. How should they handle that? And the answer came out to be quite intuitive, that you want to kind of overweight the downside and underweight the upside, because you're more worried about the downside, the risk. So risk aversion came into the story. So there was a lot of work in subsequent to von Neumann, by the way, was one of the developers, a key developer of the atomic bomb at Los Alamos. He was on the Manhattan Project, and then he's like, credited with, I think, one of the developers of the modern computer, inventors. And then we had people like names of Markowitz and Sharp and Tobin. They all got the Nobel Prize, and Robert Merton, who's viewed as the top finance professor ever, economist ever. I just taught 2 weeks ago MaxiFi Planner to his finance course over at MIT. So he sees, so we've made all of the work of, let's say, Markowitz, and which was like a very simple one period framework. You invest today and you consume tomorrow, and then you're dead. So it was compacting your entire life into one period. And then Bill Sharp, who's at Stanford, William Sharp, of the Sharp ratio, if people know about, I've heard of that, about a measure of risk versus return. It developed some important work about, and then Tobin as well, Yale professor, got the Nobel Prize as well. But then Merton took this into the dynamic dimension, intertemporal. You live for many periods, where each period is not 60 years, but a period is a year, let's say, and develop the economics. So there are all these equations and all these papers and all this work, and also many other economists. There's a very famous Israeli economist, Menachem Yari, developed the mathematics of the economics of insurance and annuities. That also is a set of equations. So, and what I did starting 32 years ago was to say, well, how can we take all these equations and basically solve them simultaneously on a computer? Because in a way that everything's internally consistent, all these equations are satisfied, if you like. And that's what 32 years later we have. And the program actually, in most cases, runs in a half a second. And that's because of great programming in terms of being super efficient in the programming, but also getting modern software, better software, and better hardware, and also modern algorithms. We got it. So I do think that anybody out there that is interested in their flight to retirement, or their flight in retirement, the retirement trip journey, should come visit MaxiFi.com and either become a do-it-yourselfer with our software, or engage with one of us to help you do the planning, where we're doing training with you and teaching you how to fly, and then leaving you in control of the airplane, because our goal is to have you fly on your own, not be constantly looking over your shoulder through time. And the main thing about our software is we're not selling any products except planning. We don't have any at the end of the road. We will manage your money for you at 1% or 2% of the fee, or something like that. There's no product, there's no external advertising. It's really just, let's get you to safety, but let's see if we can lower your taxes, raise your Social Security benefits, and then evaluate how you're spending how you're investing in a way that's consistent with the work that von Neumann and Morgenstern came up with back now 75 years ago or so. So that's it's great to have you guys on the podcast. It's great to be working with you. I think you taught everybody a lot about what it is to be true American patriots and true and why we take put our lives in your hands and in the hands of people like you when it comes to flying and also to going on to the operating table. There are certain people in this country that are true heroes, and I view doctors and pilots and nurses as primarily in that category. Politicians, not so much.
Don't get me started. But it does take all of us doing our part, whatever that may be.
Yeah. So anyway, it's been a great pleasure, and thanks to all the listeners. Thanks, Mark.
Thank you
everybody.
very much.
Thank you, Larry.
It was a lot of fun.